Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Welcome back, everyone, for the news of the week of July 29th, 2018. Paul, the Spectre attacks just don't seem to be going away. It's almost like they're haunting us.
Yeah, pretty much. That's been the trend that I've seen as well, Keith. And I think there was a lot of speculation that this might happen, pun intended.
Yeah.
But this has been a theme in application security and generally in information security, network security for some time. Anytime there is certainly a more major classification of bug found in a particular technology or a new classification of bug, that we go back to similar types of systems and discover similar types of bugs. And certainly all of the bugs in the speculative execution and other similar bugs, right? Because it was Spectre and Meltdown, right? Are they both speculative execution bugs? I think, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right on that.
Yeah, in this different types, I think, in the execution chain, if I remember or forget incorrectly. But anyway, so yeah, it's logical that different processor architectures, different versions, different deployments you're going to find similar kinds of bugs. So yeah, I think this is right in line with new. I mean, and of course, something I want to talk about in my DerbyCon presentation, right? New isn't always necessarily new, but this is, in terms of the scope and attention it's getting, a newer class of bugs. Certainly, you could probably find a research paper years before this happened that talked about, the occurrence of speculative execution bugs. In fact, I think we talked about that in this case, but now it's a bigger thing, and I think it does deserve new, although new is always hotly debated, especially in information security.
What I found interesting about this one, Paul, is, right at the time that Google releases Chrome 68, which has sandboxed effectively between all of your tabs in your browser now. So you're not going to have to worry about, speculative execution vulnerabilities inside of your Chrome browser based on the way that they handled this. But this bug goes beyond just the, malicious JavaScript trying to hammer away at speculative execution. And it's actually related directly now to your network stack. So what seems to be happening with this particular bug is if you're on the same network, you can effectively cause it to leak memory with, key information and other kind of bits on the wire as part of a Spectre-related attack, which to me, that was kind of the interesting part, right? Because we've had Rowhammer for, 2 or 3 years at this point as, an attack against memory to either force bits to flip, allowing you to execute in different, space inside of memory, or to predictively try to grab memory back from the actual chipset. And now we actually are kind of taking the same idea, right? Hit the processor via network-related requests to a device, and boom, get memory back. To me, that was kind of the interesting part about this. But one of the things that they did highlight as one of the researchers is that it's actually a really slow attack. So the speeds, at least for what they saw at this point, were 60 bits per hour for some Intel chips. But for the majority of Intel chipsets out there, it was only 15 bits per hour over a network, which seems really, really slow. But I'm sure there's some determined state actor out there that's probably already looking in how to use this to slow roll exfiltrate data.
Absolutely.
So the other one I wanted to talk about as well was it looks like Hangouts. So kind of sticking with the idea of Google here for a moment, that Google Hangouts itself has got some bad open redirect flaws. I don't know if you caught any of this, Paul, because I know you have a hatred for Hangouts yourself, but or maybe not a hatred, but at least a dislike for. Um, but this one, it was interesting to me just because of kind of everything that works. And did you look at this write up at all? It's got some really good kind of pictures in it as well.
Yeah, I just think the user experience on Hangouts is atrocious. I also think the same for the user experience, on Skype as well. Is so like security aside, I just think the user experience is god awful on some of these like video chat, teleconferencing applications. I'm not familiar with the
Yeah.
flaw, but not surprised certainly.
I mean, it wasn't terrible. I mean, right, there are worse things that could have been a flaw inside of Hangouts. In this case, it was just an open redirect flaw, which actually ended up leading to a bounty payout, if I recall correctly. But in this case, basically, people were like, "Hey, look, inside of the Hangouts Electron app, we can get open redirects." And I've recently been seeing on Twitter a number of people kind of calling out Electron as being perhaps a bit more of a dumpster fire than we thought
Yes.
when it comes to how effective it is at security. And in this case, it's largely because it's more or less a browser and it doesn't actually have a URL bar. So you can't really tell what you're going to inside of an Electron app. And if it allows for an open redirect, as in this case it did, you don't know that the site that you're going to is not really the site that you thought it is or thought it was. So in
But
the actual
Electron
example,
is
they use the Google sign-in.
Electron's really just like client-based JavaScript, right?
Yeah, that's a really good way to think of it. Yep, that's
Like,
almost exactly what it is.
yeah, like rather than having the JavaScript come from a web server on the internet and then execute it on your browser, like it's all happening on your system. Which
Well,
I
I
think,
mean, Slack, VS
yeah,
Code,
but it's
both of them.
it can be a recipe for disaster security-wise as you're changing the fundamental model and have you run through all the use cases and everything that I've seen, they have not. Because there are certain protections when you run it in a browser that's loaded from a server, right, that are inherent to that environment, such as like SSL and TLS provide some verification that the site you're going to is the site you're going to, right? There's cross-site scripting prevention built into the browser today. But if you take that whole environment and you just put it locally, you potentially lose a lot of those protections. And there was a technical segment I think we ran last year that was talking about picking apart some of these Electron-based applications, because I think largely because like the implementation changed so much that now we're seeing kind of the same class of vulnerabilities just executed differently.
Well, they all run on Node at the end of the day, right? So they're
True.
all local Node instances, which is running effectively a Node server, for lack of a better term, on your computer. So, and that is, rife with other problems, given that I
Yes.
think Node had like 53 bits for a 64-bit. What was the right word? It wasn't an int. It was like a long or something like that. So, needless to say, they were definitely like cutting off bit lengths for certain sized. It was a 64-bit float. So basically, the size of a number inside of Node was actually being kind of cut down or losing precision. So even Node itself as an environment has had issues when it comes to just good coding practices, right? Like the computer science behind it, it's a little shady, and now it's running everywhere.
Right.
And lo and behold, people are using compiled JavaScript to do things like this. So. Yeah, speaking of which, Paul, you just mentioned story number one under the "If you build it, they will come" section is Microsoft is retiring their XSS filter in Edge. That doesn't sound great to me.
I thought there was a vulnerability in it that they fixed a long time ago that ended up unfixed. I thought was the case with this XSS filter in Edge, but now they're saying they're getting rid of it altogether. I might be confusing my vulnerabilities
In fact,
too.
I feel like we covered that a few weeks ago, Paul, if not a couple months ago. I feel like we talked about that. That was definitely something we discussed on the show. And yeah, now they're retiring the XSS filter in Microsoft Edge. beginning with the most recent build. In place of it, they're looking at things like a content security policy. Now, the discussion around this is that content security policies are great, except for the fact that it really only protects about a 2% problem, whereas the XSS filter probably is covering like a 60% problem. I don't know. This looks like a
Well,
penny wise and dollar
yeah.
foolish, or they
I
just
mean,
don't want to deal with,
they got
updating it.
they got some of the functionality right because now it'll be supporting emoji 11, which is part of the Unicode 11 standard. It comes with 157 new emojis. So, I mean, you have that to look forward to. I don't know if that's in the operating system and the browser or both, but you got
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
new
most of these are
emojis.
related to Edge, but so new emojis. Clearly, people will update for the new emojis and then get cross-site scripted everywhere.
I mean, there's a
So
there's a pink cupcake in the new emojis. What more could you ask for?
fair enough. I mean, and the new peace symbol, the dove with the fig leaf, is definitely on point. But speaking of Unicode problems, by the way, Paul, looks like Japan is going to be encountering some issues here in the not too distant future. This recent article that has come up in the news is that Japan's emperor Akihito is effectively abdicating. He's retiring. And as a result, since he has been the emperor since something like 1989, the dawn of most of the modern computing architectures out there, nobody really knows how to handle this because right now they have to come up with a new way to determine the year of the emperor. Did you catch any of this? It's like the Unicode standard has to like scramble to fix this, which is the scariest thing in the world that one person could, cause so much trouble for the broader world.
Wait, so how is the year of the emperor, which is 1989, how does that impact computing in Japan or maybe elsewhere in the
So in
world?
this case, the way that they do calendar years or calendar eras in Japan is based on the emperor. So
Oh.
in this case, I'm just going to go to the article here. So the era, or the official name of the era, is the Naruhito era
Mm-hmm.
under Emperor Akihito. But the new emperor's era has not been named yet. And now what they do in terms of like the code for the year is they take the symbols, which are like the kanji symbols in Japanese, and rather than having them be two separate Unicode characters that you'd have to like type out or utilize as a calendar, it's just one character that represents that era for the emperor. Well,
Oh.
guess what? The era will change,
Mm-hmm.
and they've never had to deal with this before. So now they have to take the name of the new era, which I think they're saying is going to be something like Heisei, and take it from two kanji characters down into one Unicode character, and then have all of the systems that are relying on this kind of era-based, denotation updated to handle that. Which, I mean, you remember Y2K,
I
Paul? Like
do
that's
very vividly. It does remind me
so.
of the Y2K bug, which was largely not an issue,
Yeah.
and hopefully this is the same case.
Well, I mean, we'd like to think so. I'm sure that there were people working on Y2K, years in advance of it happening. But in this case, it was revealed, I believe, sometime earlier this year that the emperor intended to abdicate, which is why people are now scrambling, right? Because they thought maybe they had more time,
Mm.
and then now suddenly it's like, hey, by the way, like later next year, I think it's sometime like next summer, that the abdication will take place and the new era will start. And so now they've got to go ahead and update Unicode's 12.1 release to go ahead and deal with this with whatever the new era name is going to be, because they don't actually know for sure what it's going to be yet.
That's
Whereas we
crazy.
knew the year 2000 is the year 2000, right? Like that's
And we still
easy.
procrastinated.
Um, yeah, right. Yeah, and now it's like we don't even know. So it's gonna be an interesting time for the folks of Japan, especially because as you've experienced, firsthand, updating older systems,
Mm.
not easy. And there's probably some old like ERP and SAP systems out there, and all sorts of goodness that is gonna just fall right over.
Well,
Paul, any
hopefully,
other?
it's like it was my first day on New Year's Day in the year 2000, where I was at work checking all of the systems and everything still working as normal.
Yeah, that would be a spectacular outcome. I mean, thankfully, it's not necessarily a global problem. Japan is a smaller nation in terms of population and in terms of maybe their computing presence, as opposed to say like the backbone of the internet, which was originally built by the
Hmm.
United States. And so the way that we did our calendar was kind of as a result of the way that our culture works. So best of luck to the developers of the Unicode standard and all the folks in Japan that are working on updating this. Paul, I wanted to also move to a couple of the learning and tools and a couple of the food for thought articles, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to cover from kind of the bugs breaches or the if you build it sections.
No, let's move on to learning and tools and food for thought.
So in the first learning and tools under number one, they've actually just released the iGoat Swift version of the OWASP vulnerable web app called, well, iGoat, which actually is pretty cool because it goes through a number of different problems inside of Swift as like mobile hacking. And myself, I've never really been into mobile security, but I can imagine that this is something that you're going to want to check out and play with. It looks like it also had jailbreak detection, which I thought was kind of cool because it's like it goes beyond just just kind of the basics of what you'd think of for mobile application security, but actually can teach you what detecting jailbreaks looks like and how to do that. So that was actually really cool, and they're showing what looks to be an iPhone 10 or iPhone X as kind of the premier snapshot there, which is pretty neat. I mean, that's the latest architecture you can find, which, by the way, shout out to our good friend Jack Daniel, who has had the hardest time with his iPhone X. I hope that his phone works in time for Hacker Summer Camp, because he has had a hell of a time with it lately.
Yeah, my wife and I aren't huge fans of the iPhone 10 either.
Yeah, I'm not going to get one, honestly. I'm just going
Don't.
to skip this iteration
It's
entirely.
it's bad. It's bad.
Duly noted. Also, by the way, you might enjoy this, Paul. There's a WTF terminal, which I don't know what WTF is supposed to stand for other than it's a personal information terminal. And when they built it, they probably showed it to a friend, and that's how they came up with the name. Because when you look at the image,
Mm.
it's effectively like, today's weather and calendar and security, power, build, Jira code issue tickets, all within your terminal. So if you want to feel like it is in fact 1989 again and work out of your terminal, well, now you can.
Mm.
So this is a pretty cool utility, Paul. I haven't checked it out myself, but maybe you should check it out in studio with Larry and see what you guys think for like tracking Jira tickets or guest information.
Yeah, it looks pretty interesting actually.
Yeah, it looks kind of cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was impressed, especially because they've got like emojis in there. So, if you're working out of an Edge browser that's emulating a terminal, maybe you can now use your, emoji 11 emojis there too. Last one I wanted to include as well was there is a tool that was put out by, I'm trying to remember this person's name. They go by the David Diaz, Dias on GitHub, who released a front end performance checklist for a number of different, kind of tool sets, servers, frameworks, etc., which I thought was kind of cool. I know that, Paul, we were talking during the break a little bit about, broken link checkers. I don't know if there's anything in here that will meet your needs for that, but I can imagine that, if you want to just know that your site is working reliably and at scale and speed, this might be worthwhile to pick up.
Yeah, because a lot of the online tools are not very good at this either. It's nice to have something that you can customize. Because a lot of the online
Yeah.
stuff's like, search engine performance or performance in general. Search engine bots will actually check the performance, like Google's bot has performance checking and actually ranks your, I believe, includes that in their algorithm to rank the site. So this is a good thing to have under your own control. Because some of those other things are like pointing out stuff that is like so esoteric. It's not even going to make a difference. Or maybe it does. So having this tool at your disposal, I think, is good.
Well, and the other thing that I always look at when it comes to open source tools like this is it gives you the opportunity to learn from how it was developed and maybe
Mm-hmm.
build upon it, right? Like, so if you have custom checks that you want to now build, you have something to work from,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to just kind of thinking about this from scratch. So I know that in the DevOps handbook, one of the very first things that they say is like load testing and making sure that your application is performant is probably the hardest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And at least this will, help you get the first part, which is that it's performant but maybe not do the actual load testing, which is going to take more work from your development team. But again, this is a good place to probably start thinking about that. The other one that I wanted to talk about for food for thought was story number 1. This was interesting because it came out of Northeastern University, out of Massachusetts, where a student was tasked with basically solving the internet's problems, or quote unquote, fixing the internet. I rolled my eyes a little bit at first, but then I read through the rest of the article, and actually it kind of makes sense because they actually said this fix could have stopped the Equifax breach, and if anything is a headline grabber, it's that. But the solution that they propose is actually kind of novel. So what they've basically done, there is a graduate student. Her name is, let's see here, make sure I get it right, Blue Gaston. And so she was at a co-op at Polyverse Corp, and they built something called polyscripting. So effectively, the idea is similar to transpiling, right? Or in this case, translating and compiling. The idea is effectively the same, except when you are translating it down to something that is a gibberish language that only your system really knows. It's kind of like using public-private keys with the language in which your program is written. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a language that is like an actual language like PHP or JavaScript or whatever. It could be Klingon, or Elvish from The Lord of the Rings, right? Or any number of other things. But I digress. The idea here is that if your application is running using this polyscript language of some kind, and someone puts in what should be a SQL injection attack, your application won't actually understand the request that's being made by the user because it doesn't speak the normal language that you're speaking. So it's effectively an idea of they can't speak to one another because they can't translate to one another. Therefore, you're safe. I don't know. What do you think, Paul? It's a really novel idea.
I've seen similar kind of frameworks be presented in the past. In fact, I think Dan Kaminsky was working on something kind of similar to help prevent against the SQL injection attacks that you spoke of like that. So I think it's a good evolution in the right direction, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, this solves a whole category of problems potentially if done right. And now, so this one specifically, it looks like they did this for PHP, which isn't generally used as a development language today. I mean, it still exists out there, and it's still something that a lot of companies are unfortunately still supporting, such as like Facebook. But with that being said, they're apparently kind of shopping this around to some other organizations to see if they can build a groundswell around it. And I don't know, who knows? With the pace of computing as it is today, we could see this be a very real solution to a lot of web application problems, 5 or 10 years from now, if it's done right. The only thing that I can see being a problem here is how do you test the application once it's already been like polyscripted, right? Like how do you run security tests? How do you validate things? How do you prove to an auditor that your code is doing something specifically when it's in this, gibberish compiled language? So I don't know. There are other problems outside of this, but I like the idea, to say the least.
And that's typically where we leave off with like really cutting edge research like this. Is it's cool, but how do we integrate it into our operations and testing platform? And once that gets figured out, usually it starts to work its way in if it can actually solve problems.
Yeah, we shall see. But needless to say, I think that it'll be an interesting solution if it actually comes to fruition. The other one that I wanted to grab as well is more for our developer audience. So food for thought number 2 was an individual who basically built code prediction with a neural network for .NET IDE continuous runs on iOS. Which I thought was kind of cool because for me, I was like, okay, you're doing neural networks on a mobile device. But in this case, as it turns out, and I think it was highlighted at this year's Worldwide Developer Conference by Apple, the Core ML model that Apple has developed actually is performant on mobile hardware. So now you can actually develop and do machine learning against things that you were training that are actually going to end up being used by your mobile device. This was a really, really cool article overall because in this case, the problem was that the developer was having predictive issues when it came to their IDE environment. So open and close braces, open and close parentheses, following of equals with certain characters, or the ways that a function should be called, for example. So because their keyboard on their actual separated keyboard that attached to the mobile device was smaller than a full-fledged keyboard, they ended up building a neural network to provide predictive solutions or predictive filling that you could then effectively just kind of like tap or click on to autofill a lot of their coding so that they could then write better code and write faster code. I don't know, Paul, this is like the spirit of ingenuity in and of itself. I thought this was really cool. Did you catch anything in the article that maybe, because you probably know a little bit about machine learning than I do.
I don't know about that.
Well, anything that popped out to you just based on a quick glance at the article?
No, not from this article. It's funny though, as we talk about, speaking the same language, especially with respect to the previous article that you covered. I experienced that firsthand in real life. I was actually on the beach on vacation last Friday, and I felt bad for this couple because they were looking for a spot on the beach and it was really crowded, and they had a younger son, and they just couldn't find a spot. And I overheard them they felt bad if they took the spot in front of us because they felt like they were invading our space. I'm like, it's fine. I'm like, I have 3 kids. I'm like, as long as you're okay with my 3 kids. I'm like, careful what you sign up for there. I'm like, it's totally fine. And then I got talking with them, and I'm like, so what do you do? He's like, oh, I do computer stuff. I'm like, well, me too. He's like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I do security. He's like, oh, I do like UX design. I'm like, oh, so like React and Node.js and stuff? He's like, yeah. It was like lit up like, oh my God, this person speaks my language. And like my wife comes over and she's like, oh no, speaking that language again. So John and Nicole, it was nice meeting you. Hopefully they tune into the show because I was pimping out the show, which is kind of funny that awesome. You run into people that speak our crazy language of security and technology, especially in development, right? Because it's a whole different alphabet soup. So.
Well, that's been one of the most interesting experiences that I've had. In fact, I'm kind of as a pseudo announcement. I'm actually going to be speaking at a conference in Australia, which thankfully they speak English, but later this year. And so it goes to show like we have people that listen to the show from all over the place with a lot of different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. I've talked to developers, I've talked to managers, I've talked to security folks, obviously, ops people, and so it's weird how suddenly this application security thing is kind of, it's eating the world per se. And well, now I get to go and see some of that world because I get to go speak at a conference literally down under. I mean, Melbourne is pretty far away from where I live today. So
it's awesome.
So yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far. And hopefully our guests got something out of today's episode. Of course, the last thing I wanted to leave our guests with is under number 3 for food for thought. This week's commit strip episode or commit strip article or comic, I guess, is choosing the right stack, which, as Paul, you may experience when you look at these things, it gets a little bit confusing and concerning, but at the same time is an incredibly important coding dilemma as a developer. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git, commit, and stay classy.